Um, Welcome. So my name is Lucy and I'm an advanced critical care practitioner, and I am also the training pathway director for Thames Valley. I have spent a lot of time over the last year looking at ways that we can improve the induction process for trainee ACCPs. And one of the things that has come up multiple times is the need to probably introduce workplace-based assessments, and really go over what they mean. And so I have developed a series of episodes with recorded presentations, which will look at them on as individual assessments, because these assessments are a requirement within your FICM training pathway. So it's really important that you understand what you need to do with them. So this presentation in particular will focus on direct observational procedural skills, which are also known as DOPS. And the aim really is to build confidence in you as the trainee ACCP to recognise assessment opportunities and what each assessment can be collated for. So as I was saying, the work within this project has been mostly underpinned by the National ACCP Induction Project, which has been endorsed by FICM. A national consultation was undertaken and we evaluated responses from both trainee ACCPs and qualified ACCPs across the country through the use of a survey. And we reviewed the data from about 106 respondents, and only 25% of those respondents felt that they were provided with a formal overview of how to use their logbooks, what information was vital for FICM and the ARCP process. And most respondents felt that an overview of clinical procedures within their scope of practice and obviously clear guidance on what formative and summative assessments would be very helpful. So hopefully throughout this presentation I will be able to take you through some of those things. So workplace-based assessments then, there are a minimum requirement in each academic year that you must collate, and for DOPS that is 8 assessments per academic year, and this table can be found within the FICM paperwork for your reference. So direct observational procedural skills are essentially an assessment of practical skills, and you should include a whole range of practical procedures, which include the essential procedures within your FICM curriculum. As I said, the minimum requirement is for 8 to collate 8 in a year, but you have to remember that you need to be able to demonstrate progression and competency. And whilst 8 feels like a very small number, it is, and it probably wouldn't be enough for you to demonstrate your competency across your curriculum. So within your direct observational procedural skills, you will need to collate both formative and summative assessments for your essential clinical procedures. So this is the DOPS paperwork. So if you haven't seen this before, this can be found on the FICM website. And essentially this, as I've laid out, this is type of assessment. They all pretty much look like this, but obviously the title of the procedure, the assessment is slightly different at the top. So moving around the board then, so I'll use a little pointer. So here at the top you would put your details, and I would highly recommend that you probably pre-populate this on Word with your details, your NMC number, and you either pre-print them or you have those saved as a stock Word document that you can quickly access and print off when needed. So here on the left hand side refers to the procedure that you are being supervised in. So for example, if you were undertaking a radial arterial line, you would put in procedure radial arterial line. And then the code number, this reflects to your curriculum, and this is where you map the procedure to your curriculum. And this is really important because when you come to looking at your paperwork later on in the year and you are submitting for ARCP, this is how you cross-reference to your curriculum to demonstrate your competency. So if in this box that you are putting say code numbers for arterial line, that directly maps to your curriculum and you can demonstrate that at ACCP. So here the assessor will mark whether your practice was satisfactory or if it was unsatisfactory, and then you will generate some generic, some more specific feedback, and this is the opportunity for your assessor to discuss with you how the assessment went, for you guys to agree an action plan for progression. And then finally, there is a second page to this document where it talks about your performance. And if there was an area of your performance that was unsatisfactory, your assessor should be commenting on that and expanding on why that was unsatisfactory and helping you to develop a development plan to move forward within your practice. So, as I said, you should be collecting workplace-based assessments in all the essential clinical procedures within the FICM curriculum, and these are listed down on the right. For these essential procedures, it is more than likely that you will need to collate more than one workplace-based assessment for them in terms of formative, ahead of moving towards a summative assessment in these. And some of these clinical skills will require you, probably, depending on where you work, trust-wise, they will probably require you to do some local training, particularly around things like peripheral venous cannulation. I know that locally within Thames Valley that is a requirement. So these are, as I said, the essential procedures. So airway skills are considered a desirable skill within the ACCP curriculum, and for many critical care units across the country, this is a required skill of their ACCPs, and therefore it's really important that you log all your RSI procedures within your logbook, and you should gather a whole array of DOPs for the progression of your competence in this clinical skill. Currently, we are awaiting the release of the Airway Optional Skills Framework from FICM, and what that looks like will probably influence ongoing practice surrounding airway management for ACCPs. But at present, I think the best way to approach this type of assessment is to know that it is a desirable skill within your curriculum, and it's really important that you keep pretty robust records of your progression and competency within this clinical skill. So desirable skills, there are several desirable skills for ACCPs that move beyond the essential skills listed a couple of slides ago, and desirable skills generally for ACCPs will be influenced by the local clinical requirements. This is a list that has been taken directly from the ACCP curriculum, but what I would say is that this is not an exhaustive list. These are clinical skills which are within the FICM curriculum, but again, I would say you should seek local guidance on whether you should upskill into these clinical procedures and what additional training or assessment process is required to move towards a summative assessment in these areas. So in addition to the FICM curriculum, from our national ACCP survey, we know that one of the biggest areas which ACCPs have expanded into is the use of ultrasound and echo within critical care, and these are generally skills that I would say are introduced probably within training at various points, but generally you'll undertake additional training after you have qualified as an ACCP to formally certify within that area as a clinical skill. And again, these skills are very much influenced by local clinical need, and you should seek local guidance from your clinical leads as to whether it is appropriate to upskill into some of these clinical areas. So collecting DOPS can be useful in lots of other clinical areas too, and for other clinical skills too. So it's really important that you, whilst it is looking at your observational procedural skills, you are being observed in practice undertaking a clinical skill. And so areas from our survey that we found, and from discussions with other ACCPs, I think that it's really important to know that you can collect DOPS for things such as verification of death. If you undertake a focused clinical examination, such as a neuro exam in a patient, then I would be looking to get a DOPS for that, and be supported by somebody in practice to really hone those clinical skills. The other area that you could consider a DOPS for would be communication skills. So, assessing somebody's mental capacity, how we gain informed consent, discussions with next of kins, and providing patient updates. These are all areas beyond the clinical procedures which you could consider collating DOPS for. So, as I've referred to earlier in this presentation, there are two types of assessments that generally you will undertake in practice. So there'll be the formative assessment, and this can generally be performed by anyone proficient and competent in the skill being assessed. So, for example, the insertion of an NG tube could be assessed and paperwork populated by one of the bedside nurses. They are incredibly skilled and proficient in performing that clinical skill, whereas you would not probably ask a bedside nurse who had no experience of putting a central line in to provide you with a formative assessment for putting a central line in. Generally, registrars and qualified ACCPs are able to undertake these types of assessments for you, along with obviously your consultants, and as I said, anyone who is proficient and competent in performing that skill. And a formative assessment should be seen as a stepping stone. So you are developing your competency, and they are used to demonstrate your progression towards competence. What you probably should avoid doing is collating a piece of paperwork for every single procedure that you perform. It's more helpful in terms of demonstrating your competence and your progression to collate these pieces of paperwork at different stages in your process. So it's worth collating DOPS for your early central lines when you're perhaps a bit more competent, and then before you undertake your summative assessment, for example. So your summative assessments are considered your final assessments, and these are assessments which will state that you can independently perform the named procedure. So, for example, this is required for all of the essential clinical procedures within the FICM ACCP curriculum. They should mostly be consultant assessed for procedures such as central access, arterial lines, but for things such as nasogastric tubes, peripheral cannulas, they could easily be summatively assessed by either a registrar, a qualified ACCP, or a senior nurse who is very competent in those clinical areas, but that will be mostly decided at a local level as to who can provide you with summative assessments. And it's really important that when you do undertake a summative assessment, that is quite clearly specified on the paperwork, that this is the final assessment, and that is then mapped to your curriculum. So I want to just take a moment to say thank you for taking the time to join me on this first episode. If you have any questions about any of the content that I have collated, please feel free to contact me via Twitter or send me an email. I'm pretty responsive on both. And please keep your eyes peeled for further episodes. I will be collating for case-based discussions, your mini KEXs, your acute care assessment tools, and logbooks. Thank you.